Good morning and welcome to day one of the GovRAMP Learning Series, Preparing for the Cyber Summit. I am Leah McGrath, Executive Director of GovRAMP, and I'll be your host today. This series is designed to bring us back to the basics, equipping both government and providers with practical insights that set the stage for our GovRAMP Cyber Summit this October with presenting sponsor Carasoft. Each day this week has a different focus. Today, we're looking at cloud security and collaboration from the private sector perspective, what providers need to know, and how they can work alongside government more effectively. Here's how the session will flow. First, we are going to begin with a keynote presentation. Then, we'll move into a panel discussion with industry leaders. Finally, we'll wrap up with an optional office hours, so you can save all of your questions that you have been waiting for, where you'll have the chance to ask those questions to our GovRAMP leadership and to the PMO. A couple of just housekeeping items. We are recording today's session, and at the end of this series on Thursday, we will be sending out an email that summarizes the series with links to each day's recording. So we are so thankful to have you with us today, and especially thankful to our speakers who have joined us to kick things off. So with that, I'm very excited to welcome someone who has been a part of GovRAMP from the very beginning. Joe Bielawski is a co-founder of GovRAMP and a past president of our steering committee. He continues to serve on the board of directors, and Joe is also the president of Knowledge Services, our founding PMO, and just one of our legacy members. Joe, we are thrilled to have you with us today to share your story and your insights. He's truly been at the center of building this program from the very beginning, and today he'll share his perspective on the future of cloud security, what providers and private sector partners need to know as they work alongside government, and how we can together strengthen security and build trust in the cloud. So Joe, the floor is yours.
Leah, thanks for the introduction and welcome everybody. I'll start by saying over the last 5+ years, so many people have asked why GovRAMP and how a public-private partnership was formed. And the reality is that a public-private partnership, in my opinion, is the very definition of a shared responsibility model. The company I work for, as Leah said, probably much like many of those that are listening today. We're a small, medium-sized organization. We're a SaaS organization and services focused on serving the needs of state, local, and education markets. Back in 2018, if you think back, doesn't seem that long ago, really, but there was a lot of concern about data breaches, and our leadership wanted to know from a third party what our beliefs were regarding our cloud security posture. And the only model that existed at the time was FedRAMP. And so based on leadership's abundance of caution and desire to provide our clients with increased confidence in the security of our cloud solution, and candidly to create potentially a little competitive differentiation, we began our FedRAMP authorization journey. Responding to dozens of state and local RFPs, we also saw that all 50 states had similar NIST 800 policies. But with that, we were dealing with a multitude of different and in some cases competing policies, procedures, continuous monitoring requirements, reporting, et cetera, which created an enormous burden on us as a small business. So speaking with a growing list of state leaders we began to affectionately, and I say that sincerely, describe state government as broken, right? For 13 years, NASCIO had reported cybersecurity as the #1 concern that they had. And for 13 straight years, NASPO, it never showed up on their top 10 list. And so the challenge was, as we saw it, that the brokenness, if you will, the design within organizational structure is procurement is typically a lot of attorneys working with contract terms and conditions while IT is focused on cybersecurity, and the two never mix, right? attorneys don't have cybersecurity expertise. Cybersecurity folks are not attorneys typically. So therefore, the procurement organizations had to do what they needed to, which was self-attestation, check the box as we commonly referred to it. And so those challenges perpetuated as data breaches expanded into ransomware attacks. And clearly critical infrastructure concerns that existed at the highest levels of government. So I'll say by the first week of March 2020, we just happened to be, our CEO and myself happened to be sitting in J.R. Sloan's office along with his CISO in the state of Arizona. And we had this aha moment where ASRAMP was challenged with, like every other government, with funding, personnel, establishing policies and procedures that industry, private companies like us could align to, as well as all the other states. And that was really the beginning of StateRAMP. And we had created the StateRAMP name, but I will also say in the world of challenged URLs, at the time we believed it was something that was needed both at state level, but at the municipality level, political subdivisions, education, and at the federal level. So we also trademarked GovRAMP, thinking that one day should we succeed at gaining state government participation, that it would clearly expand. Well, in the midst of all of that, COVID hit. But to expand the value, or to validate the value of the need for a common standard like StateRAMP, now GovRAMP, we had an amazing group of 18 individuals representing third-party assessing organizations, other SaaS and platform providers, as well as procurement, CISOs, CIOs, and privacy officers from government that participated in the steering committee, putting in thousands of hours over the COVID time. So that's kind of the background of StateRAMP as we know it today, GovRAMP. But what being a public partner organization, or a commitment to the federal and state and local government, it feeds into our mission from the very beginning, which is serving those that serve others. And so looking at how government is designed to avoid risk, right? How do you partner with government, right? What solution? How do you become a change agent when government is designed really not to take those risks? There's no guarantee for awards. Believe me, we've lost plenty of our RFP responses, and that can be frustrating, but it doesn't change the focus, or at least our belief, the focus of being a good steward and partner to government. So what is your organization? My challenge for everybody is partnership resilience, a willingness and ability to innovate and iterate. At our heart, tenacity, focus, in spite of the setbacks. At the end of the day, it's all about reputation and not money. It's a tight battle. Reputation might make a difference in those difficult times. But at the end of the day, public-private partnerships are all about having a servant's heart, in my opinion. And I would just simply challenge everybody to become a focused organization on solving problems with government. We've been serving government for 30 years, and only 5 years ago did we find our mission and opportunity to truly partner in a not-for-profit organization with government. But partnerships in technology clearly demands a different level of transparency and ongoing collaboration. So the public-private partnership in context of GovRAMP really has resulted in an enormous transparency opportunity for informed decision-making. And I look at the CIS CRM workbook, the cyber journeys that eliminate procurement award obstacles, the continuous monitoring, accessibility to both procurement and the cyber teams. Serving government with GovRAMP demands a different level of transparency and ongoing collaboration. And the original steering committee remains active, which is an amazing blessing in our view. So through the committees, their members and the silent, what I call unsung heroes, the public service has expanded to hundreds of organizations, and it's an honor to be a small part of an amazing group. And I can't finish without first saying what an amazing job Leah and team have done, the steering committee, the board of directors, and literally the hundreds of people that have been participants throughout our journey on the various committees, all toward the common good of creating a standard, providing information that allows for government to operate safely in a secure environment and at the speed of business and at the lowest cost possible by having that common standard. So with that, I'll turn it back to Leah, but I just wish everybody the very best and enjoy the conference.
Thank you so much, Joe. When you were speaking, it brought me back to so many of the memories during those steering committee days of the why, right? When we see that different states and local governments were struggling with the same challenges that we saw happening in the private sector, we know that when there's a common and shared problem, there's an opportunity for a shared solution. And so really excited to be here today, fast forward a few years from those early days to be talking even more deeply about how do we continue to work together to enable trust, to enable innovation, and to bring people together through common accountability to have collaboration. So thank you so much for being with us this morning.
I'll say one other thing. Thanks, Leah.
Yes.
I'll say one other thing. Reflecting back, 5-6 years ago, Leah, the one thing that I will always remember is of those monthly meetings. I think it was biweekly at one point through COVID. The common theme, the message, every single meeting, whether it was JR, Jamie, pick your Dugan, your state leaders, Dan Lorman, et cetera, was whatever GovRAMP at the time, state ramp becomes, it must be business friendly.
Yes.
That was the common theme. How do we make it business friendly? And I think you guys have done an amazing job in maintaining that focus.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And it's how do we continue to simplify what's a very complicated thing, but by having that common accountability, the common standardization, I think we can get there. And so this is such a great primer for our panel discussion. So Taylor, I see your hand up. We will pause for a moment.
Just before we move on, it looks like we did get a question in the Q&A for Joe. If we want to, I think we have some time to answer that before we move on to the panel, if we want to do that.
Yes. All right. Joe, this is from Dave. It says, you mentioned state/GovRAMP responding to RFPs a few times during the presentation. What type of solicitations are you responding to, and who is your competition? That's a great question. Joe, I think you were talking about your company responding to RFPs, not necessarily GovRAMP, but you tell us.
No, that's exactly right. I had my private sector hat on.
Yes.
And in response, as a SaaS provider to government, we have our set of, it's a platform, so we have different use cases that it can be used for. We respond to those. We see that NIST 800, or we saw that NIST 800 was a requirement in those. And it was simply usually part of the standard T's and C's, first 2 or 3 pages, and it simply required a checkbox. And candidly, we looked at our competition, regardless of the use case, and just one quick Google search, and we would be able to verify hosting site, and it's hosted overseas. Well, guess what? You're not meeting NIST 800, and yet everybody seemed to check that box. And so we knew that there was a degree of risk that government was accepting, but it was a legal basis for, well, I can place the blame back on the supplier should there be an issue. So that was part of the motivation that we had, is we really need to secure our nation, secure our critical infrastructure. And if it just simply comes down to a commission check, what are people potentially willing to do? And so that really was the beginning of helping government find a solution to that. But GovRAMP, I don't believe, Leah, responds to RFPs at all. But certainly as a private sector organization, we were focused on validating for our own leadership team our security posture by pursuing third-party verification, but also finding a way to help government make secure, informed procurement decisions.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. We'll pause. Okay. Thank you, Taylor, so much. I've got the Q&A open so I won't miss future questions. As we begin to shift into our panel discussion, I will note that we are going to save some time for the end of the discussion for continued Q&A. So as you have a question, go ahead and drop it into that Q&A, use that feature, and we will do our best to get to those either at the end of the panel discussion or carry that on through to our GovRAMP office hours. So with that, I am very excited to welcome to the stage, the proverbial stage here, our panel. So our panel discussion is entitled Drawing the Line, What You Own versus What the Cloud Secures. And I am joined today by three of our GovRAMP members who are just fantastic and bring really valuable private sector experience and a little public sector as well to the conversation. Each of these team members works directly with government customers while also navigating GovRAMP requirements themselves. So they know firsthand the challenges and the opportunities of shared responsibility. First, we have Tory Crass. Tory, hello, it's good to see you. Tory most recently comes from the state of North Carolina and now is serving as the public sector CISO at Tanium. Tory helps governments strengthen endpoint security across large, complex environments. Next is Josh Daymont. Josh, CEO of Securisea, a 3PAO, where Josh works with providers to prepare for assessments and build readiness to serve the public sector. Last but not least, Tim Davis, Manager of Cyber Defense and Readiness at Fortreum, also a 3PAO, where Tim and his team focus on helping both providers and agencies align responsibilities and strengthen resilience. So together, they're going to share their perspectives on how we can all work together alongside government side by side and clarify those responsibilities. I'm excited for today's discussion because we go a little bit deeper into what do we mean when we talk about shared responsibilities, some practical tips on how to do that and close those gaps so we can build more trust. So let's just dive in. Does that sound okay? Let's dive in and start with the basics. Josh, we'll start with you and then kind of go Tim and Tory, but maybe tell us, how do each of you define the shared responsibility model in your own work? And if it's applicable, walk us through a scenario where maybe a misunderstanding of these boundaries led to a security or compliance issue.
Sure, thank you. Can you hear me okay, Leah?
Yes.
Great. Shared responsibility is one of the most complex parts of this endeavor. And it's one of the most challenging, I think, for standards bodies like GovRAMP, because it's just, there's a real difficulty to standardize the business relationships between an entity and their service provider. So what it comes down to is there are any number of ways that two autonomous computer systems or two linked computer systems, and when I say systems, I mean applications, infrastructure, companies can integrate to pass data back and forth and to operationalize a client application. And then you have these fairly set standards and have MFA, perform encryption, encrypt data at rest. And what is really impossible to do is to say, this is outside of very broad categories like infrastructure as a service works this way and platform as a service. It's just, it comes down to the client and the 3PAO like Securisea to understand, okay, what is this service provider doing? What sort of responsibilities are they taking? And are they taking full responsibility for this entire control? Are they taking partial responsibility? And then you as the client have other responsibilities. The good news is with GovRAMP, there is one of the most mature set of practices that I've ever seen among GovRAMP entities and GovRAMP service providers compared to almost any other standard. So the client responsibilities matrix, or CRM, the ones that I see for GovRAMP are amazingly detailed. Are they perfect? No. Could they cover things? Yes. And so one particular challenge that I can think of was we had a platform as a service, and there's more and more of these as time goes on, that really was designed to allow clients and merchants to piggyback on a pre-existing authorization. So they were going to set up the entire infrastructure in a publicly hosted cloud. They manage everything. They manage all the authentication. They manage all of that. And then the client places their application to be run on the actual platform. And then there was extraordinary complexity there in terms of the AC family and the AU family. So application authentication was done by the client. Infrastructure was performed by the actual service provider. But then the client still needed the ability to log into the infrastructure occasionally on a read-only basis. And then the coordination of who's authorized from the client going through the service provider's model or the service provider's existing procedures. That ended up being actually quite complicated to solve. And there was actually the great thing was that the service provider in this case had dedicated staff and was very collaborative, answered our questions. Our client was able to talk to the service provider, bring them into meetings with us. And it almost became like a dual assessment where part of the service provider was assessed by us, and then other parts of the service provider, we relied on the existing SAR and package from them and their existing SSP.
Oh, great example. Tim, then Tory, maybe kind of add some comments in your perspective here.
Sure. No, I mean, I pretty much am on the same page as Josh when it comes to like, hey, how is security responsibility supposed to be divided? I do like being able to inherit stuff from packages, but one thing that I see as a problem most often is like a lot of the times there's the security package will say you can inherit one thing, but then it leaves a lot to the imagination still. There's so much that so much professional judgment that's involved between that CSP and their assessor, and that understanding does not always translate well into CRMs or CIS workbooks or online documentation. So that's where I see a lot of the problems arise, because even if one assessor doesn't pick up a lot of these like gaps with the security responsibility being, communicated, others will. And in some cases, it feels like one auditor has to audit multiple entities to get down to the meat and potatoes of the issue.
Yep. We're using some acronyms that kind of dawned on me. CRS, CRM, and CIS worksheets that are a part of the security package for GovRAMP authorization, as well as FedRAMP authorizations for Rev 5. But maybe if someone wants to speak a little bit more to what a CIS and CRM are, that might be good context for the rest of our discussion. So, Tim, if you want to explain that.
Oh, yeah, I mean, the CIS, I guess, to start with, is the control implementation summary, where it's like, hey, is this that you have your NIST controls as the baseline, and where are they applicable, where are they not applicable, where are they being in some cases inherited, and if there is like some shared responsibility. The customer responsibility matrix is where those responsibilities that are called out by the CIS are expanded upon. Josh mentioned it a little bit earlier. Some are really well written, very detailed. Others are a bit more high level and kind of assume some prior knowledge, I would say.
Yep. And, I've thought of these CRMs as really living documents, but it's something that should be kind of evaluated on an ongoing basis. And Tory, given your experience, I'm curious your thoughts there, and then also what you've seen as some of the biggest misconceptions providers have when working with state and local governments as it relates to cloud security?
Yeah, thanks, Leah. So I think taking this back just a second to the shared responsibility, right? I think at a strategic level, as a former gov space CISO, I was always looking at it from a break down the silos and have the communication across the teams. And that really means security, working with IT operations, working with the dev teams, working with all these different groups, as well as the business leadership, even in state governments. So that's your state leadership, your governor's office, general assembly, whoever might be the stakeholder trying to make sure things are secure, requiring audits, things of that sort. So I think when it comes to working with different providers in this space, a huge part is kind of going back to defining the terms, speaking the same language, just like what we just did through these different acronyms, right? That's a big part of it. And I think that extends across the workspace when we're talking security and IT operations. What do I want from a security perspective in those environments? And why is that important? In conveying that from a communication standpoint out to those teams that are operationally going to be implementing those changes is really important. And when you have a framework, something that you can have everybody looking at, like GovRAMP, for instance, that they have a set of expectations now that they can work towards. So when you start getting questions about where different things are at and what maturity level, what process point in time they happen to be at, now you have a way that those folks are ready for that answer. They can respond to that if they're up to speed and they know that this is coming down. From a misconception standpoint, I think a huge thing in GovSpace that I noticed time and time again was when we get into an assessment, when we get into a situation where somebody's looking at one certain piece, or let me back up. They're looking at the whole thing and they start looking at one certain piece. They start making assumptions about the rest of it. And that's not necessarily the right way to go about it, because everybody looks at government as a whole, which is great in a lot of different ways. But there's different entities within even the state government where I came from, where different departments have different functions. And some of those departments would do things that you would least expect. You wouldn't expect certain agencies to be software development shops. So now all of a sudden, when you start talking about an agency that's providing services out to a citizen, that agency is now actually responsible for developing software, maintaining the software, all the infrastructure footprint that goes into all of that maintenance, and all of the security, the operational security and controls around that to keep the data that they're working with safe. And you have to start taking that into account versus just your traditional IT operations infrastructure and security lanes, because you might have those types of things happening as well. And you might need to treat them slightly differently in the context of what they're providing.
Well said. And I think, we have a common friend who likes to say, if you've seen one state, you've seen one state. It's a little bit like if you've seen one agency, you've seen one agency, even within a state, right? Because they all have different missions and charges. That's a great point to keep in mind. How do you all recommend public and private sector teams kind of clarify boundaries early in a partnership?
As early as possible. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Tory.
I was going to jump in as early as possible. Basically, having that initial conversation, and really when you're talking about private sector, public sector, everybody is talking about partnerships. Everybody wants a partnership, not somebody that's just selling you a widget, right? They want the support. They want the ability to really integrate that into the environment. And that starts with the conversation that you just mentioned, where you're trying to establish who's going to do which activity, what those swim lanes look like from a responsibility standpoint, and definitely deliverables. Who's on the hook for what? What are you actually trying to accomplish at the end of the day? Because if you don't have that, that starts to get into this weird scope creep problem where all of a sudden things just keep rolling forward because you haven't had those conversations and you haven't established those boundaries. Other folks.
No, I think that's really interesting because, we often think about, I think in these partnerships, SLAs or deliverables from a services. Why are we even engaging in this? But from a security standpoint, Tim, you started to say something, thinking about defining that partnership early on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely, I mean, necessary because it's foundational for how the rest of the service and the responsibilities are defined.
Sure.
I think I think part of it too is having that open dialogue between not just like a government entity and the cloud provider, but also everybody else that is involved with the process, because everybody's going to have a different perspective. They're going to notice things that are missed throughout the regular course of authorizations.
Yep, absolutely. Josh.
Having the open dialogue is critical. And
Yeah.
while GovRAMP has some of the best CRMs I've seen, there's just a fundamental limit to what can be put, the extent to which the nuances of those shared responsibilities, how much of that nuance can be captured. And so as a 3PAO, we will always talk to as many entities, as many different actors as possible. And that's often going to include the government client, that's going to include the entity, that's going to include counterparties at other service providers that are from where controls are being inherited. And to reiterate Tim's point, if those things aren't clarified at the very beginning, they could end up still being clarified at the beginning because you might be starting over. And we have seen that happen. We've picked up assessments where that has essentially been what's happened, and that's why the client effectively started from scratch. It can also it's straightforward to solve. It's straightforward to have those conversations, and if someone doesn't want to have the conversations, that in and of itself, I would say is something to take note of, and something to be a sign that you should be careful.
Sure.
I was about to say, like, you mentioned you're coming from a 3PAO perspective. You probably have encountered the same challenges I have trying to get information from a cloud service provider for someone you're auditing. They're like, an auditor. Do we really want to have ended of a conversation over email?
Yeah, great points. And just for those listening again, CRM is that customer responsibilities matrix. It is a piece of the security package. So I will tell you, I've had so many conversations with folks who work for providers who work directly with government who don't know that term, especially in SLED or SLTT, because if you've not seen a GovRAMP security package before, you don't know what it is or don't know that it's a part of that. So I always say, if you're on the public sector side and you're working with a provider who's got a product that's GovRAMP ready or GovRAMP authorized, ask for it. If you're a provider and you have a product that's GovRAMP ready or authorized, ask for it. And it's a really good place to start that conversation. Josh, to your point, not where you end it, but it's a good place to begin the conversation and have that. I'm curious from all of you, when it comes to SaaS versus PaaS versus IaaS, where do you see the most blurred lines tend to appear?
That's a very, I'm going to jump on that because it's such an easy question. Maybe someone will disagree with me, but Leah, if I could just add one more point to the previous, sometimes we've encountered companies, I'm sure Tim has as well, where this has happened. I'd be curious, Tim, to hear, but where you feel like the client feels like they've understood the shared responsibilities matrix during the sales process. And what they find is that there are some very slight but incredibly important misunderstandings that they may have had while they were dealing with the sales team, And I would just encourage everyone to trust but verify what you get during the sales process and go and actually double check the actual CRM just to make sure that what you understood is in fact what's documented there, because that's something we've seen more than once. In terms of, Tim, have you seen it?
Oh, I mean, a little, yes, a little less specific to the CRM because they're written a little bit more broadly to capture everything. It's usually when you get involved on the details like, oh, you want to use this service that's authorized? Great. By the way, this one feature that you need doesn't work in this region, or that's available on our premium cloud.
Yes, exactly. So in terms of PaaS versus SaaS versus IaaS, it's the closer you get to SaaS, the more complex it is, and that's to my experience, it's because SaaS just doesn't have as much flexibility, and there's just so much more to document in the CRM, and so much more complexity in the shared responsibilities. In IaaS and PaaS, it's fairly cut and dry, right? You're bringing the application, or you're bringing the actual sort of execution, and the border is the technological border between service provider and customer is just kind of set by the technology. With SaaS, there's encryption, how is authentication performed, how is logging exported, what is logged. All of these things become much more difficult from a CRM, from a shared responsibility perspective.
Yeah, and Tim, when I asked this question, you were first to chime in, SaaS. It was a quick answer.
Oh, well, I would say like yes in terms because it's like that's where the most inheritance comes into play.
Sure.
So there's just more layers that have to be explained to describe where security responsibility is being provided.
Yeah.
I would say that's definitely where it's the most ambitious, where it's the most uplift for your CSP. But maybe equally difficult, if not more so. Things that services that aren't quite SaaS services, but aren't stereotypically PaaS services, like functions as services. Those can also be extraordinarily complex, where it's like, hey, you can write code, your own code, and deploy it and have it executed here. And it's like, okay, cool. You have so much functionality in all of those use cases. How is your shared security responsibility being modified?
Corey, I see you shaking your head here. Tell us about that. Yeah.
Yeah, couple things as this conversation was going. So the first, totally agree with both of them that SaaS is by default much more complicated in terms of addressing it, and I think part of the reason for that is it's the thing that arguably I've seen change the most from like when you're using a SaaS solution, the back end of that solution, certain cloud providers, they're rolling out updates constantly. Well, all of them are really, but I've seen some of them roll it out and all of a sudden a month later, you're looking at different options, different features, different controls, different settings that you have to go through. And now you're reevaluating those essentially in flight because you're already up and running in those situations. So how do those things impact what you're doing in this space, especially when it comes to an audit? Heaven forbid you're in the middle of something and you really want to capture that stuff right then and there. And I think another complication with SaaS and a little bit with PaaS too is that they're a lot easier to spin up. So that means that in a lot of these cases, you've got teams that are spinning them up maybe without security in mind, without security controls. So if the organization hasn't taken ownership of the cloud space at the higher level to implement those policies up higher, if you're a little bit weak there, now all of a sudden you've got more complexity down at these individual layers that you need to address through the process, or I mean, they're going to hopefully come up as audit findings and things that need to be improved going forward.
Yeah, The good old SDR comes to mind. But as we think about, it's so well said, as we think about this, we've said before, there's really, it's not one and done. And that's been, I think, the real opportunity when we think about state and local government is to kind of help bring to them the ability to have that ongoing, kind of visibility and CONMON and hopefully someday that continuous authorization as well. I want to go back to CRM because we've talked about this a lot. So whether you're on the provider side or the public sector side, if you are looking at that matrix and it's unclear, someone has a question, where can you go for clarification? What's your recommendation there?
The first entity to ask is the service provider themselves.
Yeah.
And they are the ones that are authoritative on what they do and don't do. I would advise, and if we're working as a 3PAO, we will always get answers to those questions in some sort of written form, like an email or some sort of document. And that is ultimately where we look for our authoritative response to anything about what a service provider does.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, Tim.
Results may vary. I don't know if y'all have experienced it, but sometimes when you reach out via email, you'll be working with one customer representative, but not the same person. When you have other questions, you can ask the same question and get a completely different answer.
Yeah.
It's complicated for sure. Well, kind of getting into the practical, I'm curious if you have all found any specific tools, diagrams, or onboarding materials that your teams use to map roles and responsibilities. What's helpful for you? Tory, maybe start with you.
I think I'm going to take it back to basics for a second, because again, from a terminology standpoint, I think that is getting into understanding those, but most folks understand RACI, right? So I think, grabbing your RACIs, getting those in place, understanding who has what responsibilities there, I think that's a foundational place to start. And that way you at least have an understanding and you can share that and know who you're going to end up being in conversation with to get the information that you're looking for. And then hopefully that leads into your next sets of tools that you're going to end up working with to implement your controls.
I love that. One, what's our common terminology? And two, if you're not familiar with RACI, RACI, you can Google it and it really helps define who's accountable, who's responsible, contributor, and who should be informed there. I always like to say, Tory, there's only one A, right? Only one accountable. So I love that. Tim, Josh, any kind of other tools or diagrams, onboarding materials you found helpful?
RACI is for internal threats and internal controls, absolutely foundational. Another foundational tool, and it's an art, it's not a science, but threat modeling remains for me the foundational approach to designing control systems and to specializing controls for a particular environment. And it can be done extremely well. It can be done not well, but it's what works.
Right. Threat modeling. Absolutely.
For me, I mean, I feel like it's a little even more foundational than that, is working with a cloud service provider to say, hey, all right, so what are all of the services and features that you're actually aiming to cover with this authorization? Because that's going to drive pretty much everything else. The contents of your authorization boundary, which controls and which shares of responsibility are relevant for each service. You'd be surprised at how often you work with somebody and then they don't even have a good foundation of which services they're going to cover. It's something that, I mean, is a little less ideal, but I see it somewhat often.
Sure. It's a great question. Great point. Okay, I think you're all going to have an opinion here, an idea here. What do you wish more public sector teams asked during procurement to avoid surprises down the road? Tim, maybe we'll go kind of backwards. Tim, Josh, and then Tory, you know, from you're wearing the two hats, or you've worn both hats. So I think that'll be real fun. So what do you wish more public sector teams ask during procurement to avoid surprises down the road? Tim.
I mean, not so much what they would ask, but more so what they would document. Like, hey, you made this procurement decision. Supposedly, this product meets your requirements. Do you have your requirements like listed out? Do you have like a response or anything like that? Like, what did the salespeople say during this process? And is it mapping to what we're seeing during an audit?
Yep.
Yeah, I would say I would just endorse what Tim has already said. The quote, "If you've seen one state, you've seen one state," is so true and so accurate. And same for agency. What specific requirements does this contract have? What is the actual regulatory profile of the data, the state data or other government data that is going to enter this system? And then what are all the laws and regulations specifically that cover this? And what are the reporting requirements to the specific AOs, authorizing official? And some just want to see a GovRAMP authorization. Some just want to see GovRAMP ready. That's the brilliance. It's the genius of what GovRAMP has done with this ladder, where you can start small and grow from there. Others want monthly they want monthly updates with POAMs. They want much more than that, and getting all that sorted out right away just avoid surprises down the road.
Absolutely.
So jumping in from the gov side of it, I think straight out of the chute, the question is, do you understand the procurement process and what this looks like? Sometimes it is a challenge in virtually every state that I know of, like my former peers and whatnot across gov space. We've always had conversations around procurement and who's stuck in what part of it, because it can be such a complicated process to get through. So I think going to that, have you read the RFP? Have you actually, I've seen so many RFPs come through with filler data. Like they'll look at the questions that are being asked, and they'll put data in there just to have something in the field without actually getting to the detail that they need to. So being very specific about the detail that you need in there to answer the RFP questions to work with procurement, because sometimes procurement process may not get to me, the decision maker on it, before it gets eliminated through the procurement channels too. Somebody else might be looking through this and doing a quick filter. So that can cause some challenges, which is where some of the standardization that GovRAMP brings is, maybe this is a way to allow the actual buyers to have eyes on what's being offered in some cases where otherwise it's not necessarily going to happen. The other part of that, the legal and reporting that was just brought up, that's a huge one. What are we talking about when these things come through, and what are those requirements going to be? Just because somebody's FedRAMP certified does not mean that they're good to go at the state level. That does not just grant all the authorizations needed. There's specific controls that still have to be checked, still have to be looked at. And I think folks miss that sometimes, because they'll look at one framework or another framework and they're like, oh, well, I'm good over here because we do this at the federal level, or we do this in private sector and this is good enough for them. But there's not really that understanding that, again, one state is one state. Everybody is expecting whatever that is to be met in their locale. So expect red lines to happen and those to come back and forth on the contracts, because that's just the life we live. So
Yeah, no, I think I've kind of watched the dynamic and the discussion evolve over the last few years we went from self-attestation to trust but verify and trying to pull that up early into a procurement. And I've been describing it, as we move to more of a zero trust mindset of not just trust but verify then trust. And I think as we pull that up and those expectations and standardize that sooner in the procurement process, hopefully that helps. But oh man, Tory, I hear you. So as I'm wrapping things up with this awesome discussion, would encourage anyone who has a question for the panelists, please start typing that now. We want to get to those questions. But for all of you, what is one piece of advice you would give a provider or government IT lead about building security partnerships in the cloud?
Follow the data. That'll help when it comes to figuring out, all right, where does the security responsibility, lie and transform into. If you just follow the data, that makes it at least easy to follow, where the security is going to be required.
Sure.
Yeah, I would jump in and say transparency. Have
Yes.
the communication, be open about it, have a discussion. If something isn't clear, ask the questions, make sure that you're going in eyes wide open. This goes across provider as well as gov space. You have to have that open dialogue, because so many times the security risks that we end up dealing with, the fallout that ends up happening, is largely the transparency wasn't there, the communication wasn't there, people are using things in a way that it wasn't anticipated initially. So having those conversations up front makes it a whole lot easier to get through the process and helps reduce that risk ongoing, and make sure that the data that everybody's trying to protect is a little bit more safe.
Awesome.
Can I provide two?
Yes. Yes.
And so this one, the first one, doesn't really apply to the large public cloud entities, and so it's not universal. But to the extent that you, as a CSP, are using a service provider, get an understanding before you commit, before you build your system on a particular service, not just of the CRM, but what is that organization's willingness to support your actual authorization in terms of answering the questions that we've been talking about here in the panel, in terms of responding to clarifications from your 3PAO, and have that understanding in writing. We've seen assessments where that understanding was written out in the actual document, in the actual contract with the CSP, and those do go quite a bit differently than something where we, as others have said, ask questions and you just get, there's no one person to ask, and this person says one thing and another person says another thing. That ambiguity can really gum up an assessment, which is not something you want. In terms of a broad item, understand where you have flexibility in service provider controls and service provider inheritance, because usually you don't. Usually you're buying what you're buying and you're getting a package, and just understand where you're going to have to be flexible around how you do things, around how you design your controls, around what sort of even authorizations you are or aren't going to get. If your service provider has a moderate impact package, you are not going to get a high impact package from that. And so getting understanding what you control and what you don't control, I think is also critical.
I think it's a great point. We talk quite often with our public sector members about the importance of, I love what you all have said, like really understanding what you're buying and what now is your responsibility from a controls perspective. Because I think sometimes there is this perception that if I am procuring a product that is GovRAMP authorized, then I'm good, right? I'm ready to roll and plug and play. But we know that there is that shared responsibility and controls that become part of the customer's responsibility. So you can have something secure and change that security if you're not careful, I think, from from a user perspective. Darn humans. So one of the questions I'd love to ask is really around how has GovRAMP impacted these challenges? What have you seen? What would you like to see?
So starting with that, and maybe this becomes a broader conversation too. So the standardization aspect is key. Everybody's talking different languages across these different spaces, and I think one key thing that GovRAMP brings to the table for public sector is that unified set of expectations that you can work towards, that you can build towards, that you can start having those conversations early. And it's a way to really start vetting and have some confidence in the folks that you're dealing with initially, because it isn't always the case, to the point of cagey responses that were being talked about initially when we started this conversation, where folks aren't willing to have a conversation, they're not willing to share information, give you answers to things you really actually do need answers to. Then that's a big concern. And with GovRAMP and what GovRAMP is providing there, that conversation is made a lot easier. So you see folks who are using, when they start using GovRAMP, their time to get to where they need to be from a procurement standpoint, from a up and running and a solution available to do what they need to do, I would argue is faster, just because you have that standardization and the common conversation.
Thank you. Tim, Josh, anything else to add?
Tory said it brilliantly. The core benefit of the vast majority of standards is interoperability, and the internet runs on interoperability. Every computer on the internet speaks the same protocol, TCP/IP or UDP/IP, internet protocol itself. GovRAMP has taken so many different government, state, local, educational, et cetera, entities, and brought them into a framework that provides that interoperability. I see CSPs benefiting tremendously. I see state governments benefiting tremendously, and frankly, it's exceeded my imagination what's happened here in terms of the benefits of this standard. I've just I've been amazed in a positive way.
Yeah, I agree. I think it has a lot of potential, especially when it's like addressing shared responsibility gaps with like the other programs you were alluding to. So for example, CGIS, if you're a state agency that participates within CGIS, you have your own set of requirements you have to abide by. And then those requirements extend out to the cloud service providers or any provider you have that has access to data that is CGIS or can become CGIS related. I see that GovRAMP has come out with like a CGIS overlay. I think that's going to help tremendously with existing programs like CGIS, because you don't really get a lot of visibility once it gets down to the state level. I haven't seen much, and I think that if we start to see GovRAMP become a requirement for different government programs like that, you'll start to see more transparency, more consistency across the board, and maybe even greater adoption of GovRAMP across other similar frameworks.
Yep, that's a great point. Well, I want to thank all of you so much for being a part of our discussion. You can see these great QR codes on the screen. I know that's a really funny thing to put in a security discussion. You can also go to govramp.org straight to the website to find these links. But, if you trust us, you can also use your phone and grab these codes. But we do have our summit. We're going to continue the discussion. And thank you, Josh, Tim, and Tory for being a part of it. So our summit is October 2nd and 3rd. If you're attending the summit, I want to really encourage you, first of all, come. It's going to be amazing. Secondly, if you come, we do have our private sector member meeting October 1st. So if you come in early from 3 to 5, we're going to get together and have just a nice conversation. And then our second learning day is tomorrow, where we will talk more. So I see Joe popped on. Anything else? So I'm going to I ask this at the end of all the meetings. This will be for Joe, Tory, Tim, and Josh before we head over to our Q&A, which is optional. Joe, Tory, Tim, and Josh, anything else for the good of the cause?
I would simply just add, get started wherever you are in your journey. That's my
Yes.
message consistently. No matter what your goal is, take the first step. Thanks, everybody.
Yep. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. With that, we will welcome now some of our team members. And this is optional. You are all welcome to stay. We hope you do. But this is just an opportunity to have some Q&A with our team. So I will continue moderating this fabulous day. And we have Jessica Van Eerdy, our Chief of Operations and General Counsel, who many of you probably know, and she is fantastic, really heading up our operations, making things smooth for all of our members, whether they're working with our PMO or through with our government engagement directors. Amy Ventura, one of our government engagement directors, is joining us, as well as Alan Dininger. And Alan has been on several of our monthly work sessions and is often helping advise and consult on many of the technical details of our program. So Alan, even on our CGIS overlay. So love that shout out there. But thank you all for being here. So as you have questions, we're going to invite and encourage you to drop those into the Q&A. And Pradeep, thank you so much for posting a question here. I thought this would be a good one to keep us, to kind of kick us off. But before we dig into the questions, Amy, Alan, and Jessica, I'm going to make the assumption you are listening in on the past hour's conversation. But I'm just curious from each of you, what were some of your takeaways? What were some of your thoughts during the discussion? Did anything stand out to you?
I think the biggest thing that stood out to me, Leah, is really just the key indicator of success is true partnership, right? It's really understanding where your responsibilities lie. It's not outsourcing, your responsibilities to someone else, whether on the government side or on the provider side. And so I just really liked to hear how robust the conversation was around collaboration.
Absolutely. Oh, I see you, but I don't hear you, Alan. No. You work on that headset, Amy.
Okay, can you hear me? I guess, yeah, for me, I thought it was interesting with, 3 people of, similar backgrounds, but different types of roles, just how clearly like the shared priorities and understanding of what's most important of this space in this space was kind of coming through. I just thought that was a great through line for the conversation, and that we're all, working on these similar goals in our own ways and in our own spaces.
Absolutely.
How about
Alan, we can hear you now.
Awesome, thank you. Sorry if I'm repeating Amy. I unfortunately didn't get to hear your answer setting up my headset, but very similar to Jessica's answer of the communication between all parties. I mean, it makes everything so much easier when everybody's on the same page and knows what's going on. So I would reflect that.
Yeah, one of the things that I wrote down as I think Tory was talking was harmonizing. We talk so often about framework harmonization, but there's so much benefit in the harmonizing of the terminology, of the standards, of the here's what you can expect every time when you are leveraging, whether it's GovRAMP core or ready or authorized. And so I think that is really cool to think about when you get into the actual how does this work between the partners. So that was fun conversation to be a part of. One of the questions that did pop up, I wanted to toss to this group, partially because of time, but also I think this group will be able to help address this question really well. And that is, if FedRAMP doesn't translate directly to GovRAMP, do states provide documentation on the differences? And I will toss it over to you. And I suspect this is a question that popped up. If you recall, Tory was talking a little bit about, hey, just because you come in with FedRAMP doesn't mean they always works, right? So Jessica, I saw your eyes pick up. I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I mean, I think number one, there are certain requirements, and Alan can certainly speak more deeply to this from the PMO perspective, but there are certain requirements that are very Fed specific, and they're not going to be something that you need to do at a state level. Additionally, there are some, and we do inquire and push back on our government organizations to ask hard questions about this, but there are some requirements that are state specific and not necessarily just state generally specific, but if you've seen one state, you've seen one state specific, right? And a great example, we can always, harken back to our partnership with Texas. That's a great example. They have some very specific requirements that are codified with TexRAMP. So again, these are ways that you see that there might actually be a legal basis in which there's a different standard or a different requirement. Many of these are covered with GovRAMP because it is such a robust framework. And so we're actually able to go to that organization and say, you're asking for X, your goal is Y. We cover that goal with FedRAMP using these particular GovRAMP rather, using these particular controls. So do you need that separate step? And the answer can often be actually no, I don't need that. And so in that way, I do think you'll see that while there are differences in that there are things that are not included, there are also things that are that maybe shouldn't be. So it's kind of both sides of the coin. The other big difference, true, right, with FedRAMP not translating directly to GovRAMP is FedRAMP is never going to provide the continuous monitoring documentation to a state or any level of government organization outside of the federal agencies that utilize that FedRAMP package. And so there are a lot of organizations that want that continuous monitoring, and there's value in that for them to be able to see it. And there's also value from a CSP perspective in providing it one time to one place that you know is secure versus having to provide that package over and over and over again to every government organization that wants to take a look at it. So I think from the conversations I've had, that's where I would see the differences. And I would happily pass it over to Alan if he's got anything I missed.
No, I think you hit it all. Yeah, there are some more specific technical differences that FedRAMP requires that we, as GovRAMP, don't require, but states are open to making those their own requirements. So that would be a conversation that we would welcome any CSP to actually contact the PMO to have that conversation.
Yeah, one of the things I was thinking about as you both were talking is that because kind of tagging on to Jessica, your comments around continuous monitoring, I do think one of the things that we're seeing many of our participating governments really leverage is the fact that our PMO, Alan sits on the PMO side, is looking at those continuous monitoring, reporting, the POAMs, doing that management. And so it allows our participating governments to really rely a little bit on that PMO to keep tabs, right? To make sure that the reporting is happening, and through our escalation process to notify our participating government so they can log in when needed. And I think that is why sometimes you'll see, and we're starting to see some of our participating governments say, hey, even if you have FedRAMP, we want you to move over to GovRAMP so that we can benefit from that shared service. And that is kind of where Jessica said for providers to be able to report once to serve many, is the shared service for our private sector members. But for our participating governments, it's a huge, huge benefit to be able to have that shared service. So thank you, Alan, for the work you and your team does. Okay.
Either way.
Anything else to add there? Yeah. We do have another question, and I'll toss this out to the group from Maddie. In the spirit of transparent conversations, I'm wondering from a CSP perspective, how should they figure out who the right people are in government to start the conversation about risk?
So if you don't mind, I'll take a stab at that one. So I'll put my procurement hat on for a minute. And what I'm going to say is the right time is not when there is an open RFP or ITN on the street, right? Because they cannot speak to you and they, get all kinds of squibbly about that. So that is not the right time to do it. But what I would say is if there isn't something, or as an aside, I cannot tell you how often the many organizations I work for would put out an RFI, right? A request for information. And they really want to understand. And that's a great avenue to ask good questions and bring some information to the table. And we would get almost no replies because people are like, I don't want to share, the information. Well, that can be very helpful and beneficial and goes back to what that panel was talking about earlier today about collaboration and partnership and really figuring out those lines. So that's one methodology, right? The other is truly just using your resources. Everything for the most part in the government space is public record. It's looking up, do they have a risk department? Who in their IT department is handling risk and cybersecurity? And then just not coming to them from the perspective of, I have a product to sell you, but rather, hey, where are you guys in your risk journey? And some of the best partnerships that we have seen and some of the best, our provider members are wonderful. And they will come to us and they will say, how can I tell these governments that I work with, like, that they can be better and they can be more mature and this is what they can do? And the answer is you just do that. So once you figure out through whether it's LinkedIn or through their websites who the right people might be or who the next closest to the right people might be, and they can help you find the right people, really it's approaching it as we want to help you know how to have better cyber maturity, and GovRAMP is an option. And so that's kind of my 2 cents with that procurement twist up at the front. And I will pass it over to Amy and Leah if they have anything else they want to add.
Amy, any thoughts there? Anything to add?
No, Leah, or no, Jessica. I think Jessica really nailed it. Making sure, the proactive conversations, I think, comes back to what we were talking about with just communication being so important to understand. I don't know, to understand how to best move forward and protect your data. That's it for me.
And you can join us in October in Chicago at the summit. I think it's a great question because, often I know Jessica, Amy, and I in particular have referred to GovRAMP. Sometimes we find ourselves as the bridge to those conversations between providers and our participating governments, or even within a government from an agency to an agency. And sometimes risk is really led by procurement. Sometimes you'll see it from information security. Sometimes there's a vendor risk manager. Sometimes it sits with an OMB or a general. It really does vary from agency to government. But I love the idea of just continuing to ask the question. I think it's a great way to show your dedication as a partner to the public sector as well, to have the broader conversation. I'm not here to sell something. I'm here to understand where you are in your journey of risk. How can we be a better partner? So I love that. All right. I'm not seeing any other questions. I'm just kind of double checking. If anyone has anything, please drop that in.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought I'd point out, maybe it's just me, but your Q&A section says Q&A is not available for this event.
Oh, I'm so sorry about that. We've seen a few others, but I appreciate that. Do you have a question you would like to ask?
I do, just kind of at a general level. So as somebody who's very new to trying to get started here with GovRAMP, we're a small city, so we don't have a lot of skin in the game, so to speak. And so how do you foresee us handling the friction that's going to come up when we go to somebody and say, hey, we want you to do this, and they look at us and go, it's not really worth the amount of money, your small contract isn't worth it. How do you foresee us handling those situations?
That's a really great question. And I'll tell you, I'm going to toss it over, but the answer is there's not a one size fits all. And I think that's the beauty of our security program, is it's going to give you the opportunity to have a runway and also apply kind of the requirements in a way that is commensurate with the risk.
Yeah,
Jessica.
I think Leah, you just hit the nail on the head. And I think we have had the pleasure of working with many smaller organizations, and really seeing how each one has chosen to adopt GovRAMP into their processes based on a variety of factors, right? And some have said, you know, I know that I'm going to give a runway and I'm going to give time to do this, and this is what that's going to look like for me. We've had others that have said, I just need an entry point and I need some visibility. And so, you know, I might stay in the paddle side of the pool for now until maybe the bigger organizations around me come on board, but I still want to have some assurances. And so that is the beauty, as Leah said, of our program, because there is, you know, various entry points, because it builds on each other. And because for your providers, it is a verify once and serve many approach. Just because they might be small and you might be small and they're working with you doesn't necessarily mean that they're not working with others who are actually also asking for something similar or will be soon asking for something similar. So really the best thing I can tell you is, if you are interested at all in learning more and hearing about how we can kind of look at your unique situation and figure out what's going to work best for your organization, both given size and what you have capacity for. If you want, you can email us at get@govramp.org, and the right government engagement director will reach back out to you typically within 48 hours just to say, okay, let's get some time on the books and let's sit down and let's really talk. So happy to do that, and know that you're not going to be going in blind. We are there to help every step of the way. And we've done this with others. So we have some foundational, you know, roadmaps we can work with too.
Just as we have a step-by-step program for our providers coming through the process through our Progressing Snapshot program, as Jessica mentioned, Monty, we've got kind of a step-by-step program that our government engagement directors, and Amy is one of our directors. I didn't know if you had anything else to add, but you would have a dedicated person to help you. So you're not alone either in creating education or identifying that program. But Amy.
Yes, in fact, I am Monty's government engagement director, and we have spoken a bit. So yes, thank you, Monty, for joining us today. I think you guys hit the nail on the head about just the conversations, and what Jessica said about verify once, serve many is like, once you're involved with GovRAMP, I mean, we like to tell vendors that can help them increase their business opportunities with, all the other government entities that we work with. So, we have ways to talk to vendors if they have specific issues that arise. We'd be happy to help with that.
You'll be hearing from me again very soon. I'm working on drafting some stuff internally and trying to get the right people on board before I reach back out. So thanks.
Looking
Sounds
forward
great.
to it.
Thank you. Any other questions? Feel free to kind of unmute and chime in, or ask your question, or you drop it. We'll figure out the Q&A. So apologies if others are having difficulty. All right. Well, with that, I just want to thank all of you for taking time on the Tuesday after a holiday to join us, and to thank all of our speakers and my team here. Our team and colleagues are just phenomenal. And so it is truly our pleasure to be with you, to serve you. We say all the time, we innovate through iteration, and that comes, those ideas come straight from all of you, our members. So thank you for being a part of today. We truly hope to see you October 2nd and 3rd, or if you're coming October 1st for the private sector meeting. We hope to see you in Chicago. That is only a few weeks away. I cannot believe it, where we will have our second GovRAMP Cyber Summit with presenting sponsor Crass, and just have some really exciting speakers and great discussion lined up. So we hope to see you then. Until then, if you need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. Our emails are first name @govramp.org, so pretty easy, or you get at govramp.org or info@govramp.org. We'll get you where you need to be as well. Team, anything else for the good of the cause? One last time. All right, seeing none. We will adjourn today and see you back here tomorrow, same time, same place. Thank you all so much and have a wonderful afternoon. Bye all.
Thank you.